After several months of anticipation, Netflix finally released its Marilyn Monroe biopic Blonde. And while it's based off true events, the film does claim to boldly reimagine the life of Marilyn Monroe. Ana de Armas stars as Marilyn, while others take on roles from her private and public life. And in this video, we'll talk about how Netflix's Blonde cast compares to their real-life counterparts and how well they were adapted for the big screen. Let's get started. First up, it's Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe. Ana de Armas takes the lead in Blonde as the iconic Marilyn Monroe, who was actually born Norma Jeane Baker in 1926. Monroe's estate prior to the movie's release revealed that they thought casting Ana de Armas was a great choice since she truly captured the star's humanity, glamour, and even her vulnerability. In order to fully take on the role of Marilyn, the Cuban actress was said to have spent over 3 hours in the makeup chair every single day that they were shooting, which was a total of 47 days. The mental math on this one is driving us nuts. She also worked for months with a vocal coach in order to perfect the breathy tone of voice that Monroe used to speak. In the film, we see a number of iconic scenes being recreated by Armas, including the actor's flying skirt over the subway grate, which basically threw the entire world into a complete frenzy. The effort of Ana de Armas definitely proved to be worth it in the end, since her performance in trying to convince us that she is Marilyn has been stellar, to say the least. From her raspy voice to her inner vulnerability, we think Ana de Armas nailed it as Marilyn Monroe. Up next is Bobby Cannavale as Joe DiMaggio. Bobby Cannavale plays the role of the ex-athlete who's presumably meant to be Joe DiMaggio, Monroe's second husband. And in the film, the two are seen sharing an almost one-sided conversation where the former baseball icon is shown as falling for Marilyn Monroe hard. They promptly get married, and the film shows most of the marriage in a really ugly light. We see him abuse Marilyn both physically and emotionally and belittle her every chance he gets, especially when she's already in a fragile mental state. In reality, their relationship was unusual from the very beginning. DiMaggio was captivated by the blonde bombshell back in 1952 as a fan when he was still playing. Once he retired, the athlete asked to be introduced to Monroe, who is reportedly quite hesitant to meet him, assuming he'd be the typical arrogant athlete. Despite that, they eventually managed to maintain a 2-year-long distance entanglement on different coasts of the country. It's hard to think of a better choice for Joe DiMaggio than Bobby Cannavale. The smooth-talking Italian-American portrays DiMaggio in a way that makes him extremely believable. In reality, Monroe ultimately went to the courts to ask for a divorce 9 months after getting married on account of the mental cruelty inflicted by her then-husband. Tragic indeed. Now we have Adrien Brody as Arthur Miller. Adrien Brody stepped into the role of the playwright in the film, who's most likely meant to be depicted as Arthur Miller, Monroe's third husband. Their tragically doomed romance is brought to life by Brody, who goes on to describe the process of depicting their traumatic relationship as heartbreaking. Blonde shows them meeting in 1955 when she performs one of Miller's plays, and he then begins to refer to her as My Magda, who is thought to be his first love. In reality, they actually met on the set of As Young as You Feel in 1951 through a mutual friend, Elia Kazan. At the time, Arthur Miller was married to his first wife, Mary Slattery. Monroe and Miller then reconnected in 1956 and were married a couple of months later. She even converted to Judaism and claimed that this was the first time she was really in love. Unfortunately for Monroe, this relationship had its own fair share of challenges, and she suffered multiple miscarriages, which took a huge toll on her mental health. She also came across Miller's diary entries that outlined how he was disappointed in her and often embarrassed by her in front of his friends, all of which is shown in the film. Adrien Brody is right, it was heartbreaking to watch. They eventually divorced 5 years later in 1961, and when Marilyn was found dead a year later, Miller didn't even attend her funeral since he blamed the media and fame for her death. Next up, we have Chris Lemmon as Jack Lemmon. A lot of critical reviews have pointed out the fact that despite the film's disturbing take on Marilyn's life events, it does pay a lot of attention to detail when it comes to the casting of the people around her. For one particular role, Blonde literally sought out a family member to portray the character on screen. A 68-year-old Chris Lemmon, the son of Jack Lemmon, made a brief cameo in the movie as his own famous father. This was perhaps the film's greatest masterstroke, convincing Chris to portray the screen legend that was his father. We guess you don't really need to spend hours on the makeup chair every single day like poor Ana de Armas when the resemblance is basically in your DNA. In the 1959 classic Some Like It Hot, Jack Lemmon was Marilyn Monroe's co-star, and he claimed in an interview that the two got along great on set. And in the movie Blonde, Chris plays the role of Jack during the filming of their movie together, done up as his father's character Daphne. While Lemmon may have said that they got along great, Monroe had a different experience. She was dealing with some heavy substance abuse at the time and had trouble remembering her lines and showing up to work on time. Jack's 2 children, whom he welcomed with his wife Cynthia Stone into the world. At the time the hit film came out, Chris was only 4 years old. Let's take a look at Juliana Nicholson as Gladys Baker. Juliana Nicholson has proved herself as one of the most versatile actors in the industry, and for Blonde, she once again revamped her appearance to take on the role of Monroe's mother, Gladys Pearl Cheryl Baker, with whom the actor had a troubled relationship. The first 15 minutes of the film tend to build upon this troubled relationship, and Gladys is portrayed as not only unstable, but also deceitful. In reality, Norma Jeane was Gladys's third child, and her mother's first husband took their first two children and left her to struggle on her own, despite her pre-existing mental health issues. Through the course of Marilyn's youth, her mother's mental health kept worsening, which led to foster care for young Norma Jeane. Ultimately, her mother was institutionalized for several years following a nervous breakdown. The film tends to take quite a few liberties in depicting some of the scenes between Norma Jeane and her mother, which would have no way of becoming public knowledge since they happened behind closed doors. There's no evidence of Gladys driving them towards a massive fire, nor is there anything to suggest she tried to drown her daughter, but the proven facts that have been depicted accurately are the mental health issues Gladys suffered from. She was clinically diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Her mother's struggles eventually led Marilyn's PR team to tell the public she was an orphan, despite her mother being alive and her father's identity being relatively unknown up until recently. Finally, Casper Phillipson as President John F. Kennedy. To this day, the extent and nature of Marilyn Monroe's relationship with the former U.S. President John F. Kennedy remains a complete mystery, but in the film it serves as one of the most graphically traumatic scenes. Monroe is depicted as landing in New York, and the minute she does, she's physically dragged by a pair of Secret Service agents to see the president. During the car ride, she even tries to clarify that it isn't sexual between the two, but the Secret Service agents pay no heed. When she's finally ushered in to meet JFK, he pays her little to no attention and remains on the phone while commanding her to pleasure him. Monroe is then shown performing oral on the subject before he presumably her. In reality, there's been no evidence to prove that JFK and Monroe ever had a physical relationship, let alone a violently abusive one. While some people, including Joe DiMaggio, have been vocal about conspiracy theories of the powerful Kennedy's involvement in the iconic star's death, there's been no proof to suggest that that could have happened. Garden in 1962. She wore a skin-tight beaded gold dress that was eventually sold to Ripley's Believe It or Not for almost $5 million in 2016. The dress recently came into controversy when it was worn by Kim Kardashian at this year's Met Gala. That's a wrap for this video. Do you have any thoughts about the cast of Blonde compared to their real-life counterparts? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.